So we must do two things, two great things together to encompass that enormous new view that lies before us, but to encompass it within the framework of science, to see it within the whole categorical framework of science, and to see that these two are not separate, but that they are wedded. The bigness of the idea, the newness of the idea, the greatness of it is one with the structure of science, the structure of being itself. What is the logos? What do we mean by logos? You know that that's a term that has itself a great history, a great evolution. That it goes back again to the period of the Greeks in Greek philosophy, and develops from Heraclitus through the Stoics up to Philo and Plotinus. And so there's a whole development of that, even up to, I think Philo was the one that more or less wed the Hebrew modes of thought with the Greek concepts, and thus brought that term logos into the picture such that John could pick it up and use it in a very definite way. But the whole meaning of that term logos is a meaning that has evolved. It has many beautiful aspects to it. Heraclitus, for instance, would say that the logos is that which governs all things, yet is also something we encounter every day. That logos comes from the Greek verb lego, meaning to say. The earliest meaning was connected discourse, argument, rational principle, reason. Argument. You know what argument is? Yeah. Let's see. Connected discourse, argument, rational principle, reason. Do you know what is meant by argument? Do you know that this is a something in logic? You see, logic comes from logos, from reason. Argument is not something that you have with someone when you disagree necessarily, but it is a logical form, a form of reasoning, a way of reasoning. Syllogism, for instance, is a logical argument. You have deductive arguments and inductive arguments, in deductive logic and inductive logic. So here they say that argument is meant by logos. In the 3rd century, you had the Stoics who said that the logos is the immanent ordering principle of the universe, that it is nature's overall rational structure. The logos is that which denotes reason or order in words or things, such as in discourse, in definition, in formula, in principle. In its most important sense in philosophy, it refers to a cosmic reason which gives order and intelligibility to the world. It's the reason in man that regulates all
physical processes and is the source of all human law. The creative source of cosmic unity and perfection. Containing within itself a multitude of intelligible and purposive forms operating in the world. As regulating all things, the Logos is that which regulates all things, as directing all things toward the good, and as the ordered course of events. Logos is nature. And Philo, then, I told you about, was coming in with that connecting up of the Greek concepts with the Hebrew concepts, so that the Logos, according to the Dictionary of Philosophy, the Logos becomes the immaterial instrument and agency through which the creative activity of the transcendent God is exerted upon the world. So that in Christian philosophy, and you know that there was a Christian philosophy, we don't know much about that. It's something that needs to be investigated more, I think, that Christian philosophy, that period of Christian philosophy. In Christian philosophy, the Logos becomes the second person in the Trinity, the Christ. Or the calculus. And in Christian philosophy, the Logos becomes the second person of the Trinity, and its functions are identified with the creative, illuminating, and redemptive work of Christ Jesus. But I fall back on Max Kapler's work with the prologue to St. John, when he told us about that Logos. And do you remember that he equated it with the calculus? It's the calculus. This is my mini hypothesis that perhaps the word that we're speaking about here is the Logos word, the calculus word. Yes, okay. You see that John said what? He said that in the beginning was the Word. And when you look into the commentaries and the scholarly researches that have been done in respect to that prologue, you find that that rendering in the beginning is the same rendering that we have at the beginning of the Bible, in the beginning God. And that term beginning is not the beginning that we think of, but it means that, as Mrs. Eddy says, the infinite has no beginning, but this word is meant to signify the only. So that, as though to say, in principle, the calculus. In principle, the calculus has always been. When John uses the term was, the verb was, they say that this was is not the was as we would think of it, but it means the pre-existence of the Word, or Logos. The pre-existence of the Logos in eternity, the timeless sense of the Logos. So you see that he begins that in the beginning was the Word. We could say, in principle, the calculus has always been. The calculus has always been. And the Word was with God. Again, the was must be retranslated to what it actually means, that sense of pre-existence in eternity. So the calculus has always been with God, and with apparently means that it has presence and relationship to God, so that the calculus has always been in its principle. It's always been related to God, present with God. It's that which is present with God in its principle. And the calculus, or he says, and the Logos, and the Word was God. Again, the was is the pre-existence. So, and the calculus has eternally been God, is eternally God. The same was in the beginning with God. All things were made by him. It's as though you feel a descent in the whole thing, as though we have started from the standpoint of science itself, that in principle the calculus is. And the calculus has always been present with, related to God, with God, in principle. Is this a touch of divine science, perhaps? Again, and I don't know, I don't want to say hard and fast what these are, but we'll just feel out what we can. Let's see, we said, and the Word was God, you see, is the calculus has eternally been, and then they say that this means of the same nature and attributes of God. Now this, I don't know, has perhaps a touch of divine science, or if we look at that nature and attributes, if we think of it in terms of ideas, it may have a touch of absolute Christian science. I wouldn't want to say conclusively at this point. I would want to do more research on this prologue. But then it goes on, all things were made by him. You hear absolute Christian science coming in. In other words, all things are made by the calculus. And without him was not anything made that was made. Without the calculus was not anything made that was made. Nothing is made, nothing is created, nothing is brought forth except it be brought forth by the calculus. You feel there a touch of the equipollence, at least I do. Listen to it again. All things were made by the calculus. Without the calculus was not anything made that was made. But it's the equipollence of God with a touch of absolute Christian Science. Because there isn't really anything negative there. Did you hear it? And yet you feel it is saying the same thing in two different ways, huh? It's taking in the possibility that the listener may think that there's something that has been made by something that other than the calculus. And then to Christian Science, perhaps, that in him was life, in the calculus is life. I guess that life it's the same was, that is that pre-existence, that ever-eternal existency of being, that's the life in the calculus. But it says, and the life was the light of men. It's the light of men. And so you get really a feeling that the calculus comes to shed light, to bring light, really to bring that infinite light that gives us the way of life, the way of evolution. Calculus does that very much in the word vertical, as we will see. And then another touch of equipollence, but this time from the standpoint of Christian Science. And the light shineth in darkness, and the darkness comprehendeth it not. The darkness comprehends the light not. So that, in other words, right where you think there is darkness, that's light. That's the light of the calculus. That's the working of the calculus. So that is my mini hypothesis that perhaps we have the word matrix after all, but from a completely different standpoint than we had thought of it before, as the calculus itself. Because we have what? The calculus in divine science and the calculus in absolute Christian Science, bringing forth the calculus in Christian Science. That's all the calculus we know of. We know any other calculus, any other level that we haven't got somehow pictured here in this matrix. Do you follow me? The calculus of divine science is shadowed forth, is reflected forth. The calculus of absolute Christian Science is reflected in the matrix here, bringing forth the whole calculus of Christian Science. Good.